I want to do something a little different this week. You're used to me having something that's written. I have something for you to watch. And as you're watching it, please stay tuned, because as soon as it's over, I have an invitation for you that I think you're going to find important. So stay on, because we've got something significant for you to see. Quentin, I know you've worked with young people, that you've traveled with young people a great deal of the time. I was fascinated by a story that you shared with me that happened in San Rafael, Mexico. I know you go down to Mexico quite often with kids. Give me some idea of what you were doing and how the setting unfolded with this trip.
We used to take a lot of youth trips where we'd take 15, 20 teenagers and would go down to Monterey and over Saltillo and then down south, and there's a whole group of rancheros down there, a lot of sharecroppers, little bitty places. And San Rafael is about 2,500, 3,000 people, but all around there is a lady by the name of Sister Adricula and her husband Octavio, and they had been missionizing up and down that ridge for 50, 60 years. So they had these little mission points. So I'd have these 20-some load of kids and would stop. And, you know, they'd bring everybody out of the 3 or 4 little huts, gather around under a tree, and would sing a song. And, you know, nobody could speak Spanish, not really, and they couldn't speak English. And you'd pray for each other. And this one afternoon, probably 20, 30 Hispanic children, plus our children. And so they had me praying for people. And they brought this little girl up, 14 years old or so, and they had her kneel in front of me. And Robert, I laid my hands just like this on her eyes.
Now, did you know anything about her condition or her situation?
Nothing. Never met her.
Did she look okay?
Looked fine. She had, you could tell she had trouble seeing. You could tell that something was wrong with her pupils, or they weren't there necessarily.
Well, now, didn't you tell me there was something white as part of that?
Well, when I laid my hands and started praying, it looked and felt like milk running over my fingers. And it just kind of, just like water, but it was white. And when I lifted my hands off her face, she had the most beautiful blue eyes that I'd ever seen in my life. And she started crying and screaming. She started calling for Mama. And Mama stepped up and around her, who couldn't have been very old, and she'd feel Mom's face. She'd never seen her mother's face. And she'd feel her Mama's face and say, Mama, Mama. Oh. And then her dad, siblings, and she'd feel their face. That's how she had known them.
Oh my.
Most beautiful, beautiful blue eyes I've ever seen.
Now this happened as you put your hands on her.
Yes.
That seems to me to be very much like what the Scripture speaks about of laying on of hands. Is that something of that order?
I think so. I think just that simple touch of humanity, just that simple act of compassion. You know, we live in a culture, particularly in America, where we're afraid to touch somebody. Mm-hmm. And just that touch of care. Frankly, I wasn't touching her thinking I had anything. That wasn't. Mm-hmm. They brought her up and knelt her in that little dirt and rattling off in Spanish, and I could understand poquito. I could understand about 30% of what they were saying. Mm-hmm. Knew she had trouble seeing, but I wouldn't have known she was blind necessarily. Mm-hmm. And it was just a care, Robert. It was just a love for her. And, you know, I'm struck by the surroundings we're in. These are poor people. I don't know if they'd ever seen a doctor. And I do think just that sheer love. And the other thing that stands out is all those American teenagers standing there. Now, they're hurt and they're wounded and they care for this child. And so I think that combined care and love as we laid hands on. And, you know, the most profound thing that happened is it changed the lives of those 20 kids.
Well, what did the kids say? Here's a girl who's essentially is a blind child and now has her sight back. How did that affect the children who were watching?
3 of them came to Christ. 3 of them came to Jesus. You know, you take these young people on these missions trips, and of course they come from the church or they know someone, but several of them didn't know who Christ was. And so the most profound thing that happens is that conversation that happens as you get back in the van and drive away. And those kids can't deny that Jesus is Lord. They can't deny that there is a God who's bigger than their parents' expression.
Well, Quentin, how did you come to believe in, know about, practice that touch where you reached out? How did that develop with you in your own background?
I have a grandmother. I had two grandmothers for this matter, but I had a grandmother that prayed over everything. I mean, if it moved, she prayed over it. If it didn't move, she prayed over it, Robert. I mean, we prayed over eggs. We prayed over chickens. We prayed over noodles. We prayed over everything was going on. And if Grandma couldn't get her hands on you, she got somebody to get hands on you. And some of the oddest concoctions of oils that Grandmother would pray for you. So I grew up with believing that here in this old red dirt of Oklahoma that God would interact in our lives in some way. And that just shapes and forms us. And so all the way through my life is this understanding that let's lay hands on, let's touch.
Do you still practice this ministry, this reaching out and touching people?
Daily.
Daily.
Carry oil in my pocket. Carry just this little can of oil that you can order from anywhere that's a Christian supply. And I think I've had one person in my life ask me not to pray for them. Just one.
Interesting.
Most people want you to pray for them. Just be kind and ask. And in my experience, don't go into a lot of theology about it. Just, can I pray for you?
Well, do you think people who are listening to us over this video today could learn to do that?
I think not only could they learn to do it, that it just take the risk. There's just 4 or 5 little things I think that we could all learn, and if we just pay attention, that would help us. Number one is don't be afraid of it. Just don't be afraid of it. Most people are afraid if they pray for something, it's not going to happen. Well, honestly, I'm more aware that if something happens, I'll have to explain it. I'm more afraid of something happening, and then they're going to ask me to have the answers. And the truth of the matter is, I don't have the answers. I'm always surprised. But there's certainly got to be some common denominators of just, one of them is just wanting someone to be better. We just wanted that little girl to be better, Robert. We weren't trying to get, there wasn't anybody around taking pictures. This is long before Apple phones.
Yes.
We just wanted her to be better. That's all.
Well, that's a word of encouragement that anybody listening to us today can get their hands around if they're willing to step out, if they're willing to take the risk, the step of faith. The multitude of people who listen over this channel that we're on have got to be people who have been faced with difficult circumstances, and you've shown us what happens when they walk by faith. Amen. Thank you, Quentin.
My pleasure.
I hope you found what you just saw to be inspirational and be encouragement to you. And I'd like to hear from you. Please write me at Miracles Never Cease, Box 2, Bethany, Oklahoma, 73008.